Hello, hello. Welcome to Wicked Words, the podcast where you get to listen to my terrible New England accent while I talk about true crime and other dark topics. My name is Brooke, and today I am doing something a little different. I'm actually going to start a series called Women Who Kill, and I'm going to release it probably once or twice a month. And I want to start with a series called Kids Who Kill. I was originally going to do it as like a whole documentary type video about like juvenile justice and things like that, but I feel like I might be able to cover it better if I do it in shorter spurts. So please let me know what you think about that. Your feedback is always welcome. I hope you all had a wonderful Halloween. I'm feeling much better, thankfully, despite the fact that everybody else in my house is currently sick. So I'm trying to stay away. I was able to do a bunch of research into the episode that I'm going to present today, but it may not seem that way, I guess. There wasn't really a lot of information about it, so I did my best. Let's jump right into it, though. It was the perfect day for a wedding. Clear crystal blue skies with the warm sun beaming down on the joyous couple who were gathered by a small babbling brook near the Smoky Mountains in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, to unite as Mr. and Mrs. Timothy Richards. Shonda was glowing in her ivory gown, her pregnant belly protruding from the fabric. They held hands as they vowed their love to each other and were pronounced husband and wife, sealing the deal with a kiss. But Shonda wasn't pregnant with her new groom's baby, and this was not her first wedding. It wasn't even her second or third. This was Shonda's fifth marriage, yet it had only been her second divorce. Tim had no idea about his blushing bride's bigamy. He didn't think anything about her request to marry outside of their home state of Alabama. Granted, Tim didn't know much about Shonda. The pair had only met weeks earlier at the BC Lounge, a country bar that she frequented. In fact, it was where she had met Randy McCullough, husband number 3, just 2 years prior. Shonda Nicole Johnson was born on September 30th, 1969. Not much is known about her childhood, and her history really begins around 18, when she dropped out of Walker High School. This is where she met her first husband, Jeffrey Allen Nelson, and within months, the young couple were married and expecting a bundle of joy. But their marital bliss didn't last long. Throughout their 6-year marriage, the Jasper Police Department had been to the Nelsons' home on a multitude of occasions. Jeff had even filed police reports accusing Shonda of trying to kill him. After she started leaving their son with neighbors to go out, he had enough and filed for divorce. Subsequently, he was awarded full custody of the pair's son. It didn't take long for Shonda to replace Jeff with James, Jimmy Tidwell. Unsurprisingly, this marriage only lasted 5 months. One night in 1995, Shonda was dancing and drinking at the BC Lounge when a dark-haired, mustached man sitting at the bar caught her attention. She made her way to him and whispered into his ear, luring him to the dance floor with her. This is where Shonda worked her magic, silently seducing her lovers, swaying to some Bobby Gentry as sweat streaked down her porcelain skin. And Randy was instantly mesmerized. Randy McCullough, a machinist and aspiring pilot, was a very religious man, but something about Shonda was too tantalizing to resist. When he proposed to her just weeks later, he made one request: the pair be married by the preacher from Mount Olive Missionary Baptist Church, where Randy was a member. Shonda ecstatically agreed, and the couple set the big date for June 24th of that same year. As the date approached, anxiety grew in Shonda. She wasn't sure how to tell her husband-to-be that her previous marriage hadn't legally been ended. She waited, hoping that her divorce would be finalized before her upcoming nuptials, but the day before their wedding, she was forced to come clean. Understandably full of emotion, Randy contacted his preacher to discuss the conundrum and determine what could be done. He felt hopeless, but ultimately his preacher convinced him that the ceremony could go forward. The couple would simply have to file a marriage certificate when the divorce was finalized. Randy reluctantly agreed. The fact Shonda could hide something so enormous from him until the very last moment left a bad taste in Randy's mouth. Was he making the right choice? How could he trust his future wife when she was clearly incapable of being truthful with him? Randy attempted to cast his fears aside, looking to God for guidance, and in the end, he chalked up Shonda's lie to a fear of being abandoned had he found out. Randy was determined to show her that he was not that kind of man. Randy worked hard to support his new little family, but when he would return home, he would find an empty house. Shonda was spending her days bikini-clad at the beach, wrapping up each night at the bar, doing what she did best, seducing men. This routine grew old quickly. Randy wanted a traditional family, and even with the news of a pregnancy, there was no slowing Shonda down. The marriage continued to crumble. Eventually, Shonda came home less and less until just one day she never returned. In October of that year, a mutual friend had the unfortunate task of informing Randy about the town gossip. It had been going around that Shonda recently married a man named William Bill McIntyre. On September 29th, she and Bill were wed in a courthouse ceremony. Randy was enraged. Shonda's bigamy went against God above all else. Randy thought of Corinthians 7:39, which states, quote, "A wife is bound to her husband as long as he lives. But if her husband dies, she is free to be married to whomever she wishes, only in the Lord," end quote. Randy was still alive, and Shonda was still his wife in the eyes of the Lord. This was an abomination that needed to be remedied. Randy went to the Jasper PD and filed a report. He testified in front of a grand jury who found that there was probable cause that Shonda had intentionally committed bigamy, a Class C felony in the state of Alabama. This charge included the potential of fines upwards of $15,000 and anywhere from 1 to 10 years in prison. A warrant was issued for Shonda Nicole McCullough, and she was arrested shortly after. Upon her release from jail, Shonda returned home to find that Bill had been released from the hospital. He announced to Shonda that his failing health had been a result of AIDS, and he was moving to his parents' house. Once again, Shonda found herself alone, but as always, it wasn't for long. Within a month, she had began dating a man named Ronnie Webb, and within 3, she was pregnant with his child. It wasn't until she started pressuring him to murder McCullough that Ronnie started to distance himself from her. Shonda refused to be by herself. She returned to her husband's hunting ground, the BC Lounge, and in the spring of 1997, with a very visible baby bump, she was approached by Tim Richards. He patted her tummy, telling her, quote, "I'll take care of this," end quote. Shonda had found the man that she was looking for, a largely submissive partner willing to do everything that she had asked. Only weeks later, Shonda was swept off her feet by husband number 5 near a little river in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, but the two wouldn't live happily ever after. 6 months after the Richards wedding, Randy McCullough officially filed for divorce. He was seeking full custody of their son, and given her promiscuity, he was also requesting a paternity test for Chad, who shared Shonda's 4th husband's surname instead of his own. Shonda was already hormonal, but this tipped her over the edge. Enraged, she turned to Tim to take care of it, as he had promised he would. If Randy was gone, the bigamy charges would be gone, Shonda thought, but she didn't reveal this motive to Tim. Instead, Shonda played on Tim's desire to protect her, crying to him that Randy had previously raped her. Obviously, Tim was on board for whatever Shonda had planned. He could not allow a rapist to gain custody of Chad. Shonda sweetened the pot when she disclosed the fact that Randy had recently received a big settlement payout for an accident that he was involved in. If he was gone, that money would become Chad's, and in theory, it would become Shonda and Tim's. Their eyes turned green with greed as they hatched a scheme. That Thanksgiving, the couple giggled as they sat and discussed their plan to, quote, headhunt, end quote, at the dinner table of Tim's sister. Audrey wasn't sure whether the couple was serious or not, but they had bragged about a gun in their vehicle. Scared of what might happen, she stopped her brother on his way out. She begged him, quote, please don't do anything stupid, end quote. He gave her a kiss on the cheek and assured her that everything would be okay. 2 days later, a babysitter arrived at the Richards' apartment. Shonda and Tim took off to the Cooler, a restaurant in Jasper. They sat down and looked over the menu, discussing what they might want to eat, when the waitress came over and informed them the kitchen was actually closed. Shonda was fuming, and they returned to their apartment briefly. Once again, the couple headed out, but this time they were en route to Shonda's favorite place, the BC Lounge. As they pulled into the parking lot, Shonda pointed out Randy's car. Tim got out and slashed one of McCullers' tires, quickly returning to his vehicle, where he and Shonda sat, waiting. Finally, the drunken man they were expecting stumbled out of the bar's entrance and climbed into his car. Randy took off, and it was evident that the cut had not done as much damage as Tim expected. Shonda screeched. They lost Randy as he drove off erratically around Jasper, but eventually she spotted his car outside of the omelet shop. They stalked Randy, watching him eat before he returned to his vehicle, taking off once again, but this time his lacerated tire finally had given up. McCullough drove down the highway, looking for a place to pull over. Tim followed behind, being careful not to get too close. He didn't want to be noticed. In the passenger seat, Shonda began loading shells into the rifle she held between her knees. Randy pulled into the parking lot of Harmony Baptist Church to assess the damaged tire, and Tim pulled in behind him, right as Shonda, quote, bolted the shells into the chamber of the rifle, end quote. Randy was unsuspecting, hunched over, focused on the task at hand. His inebriated state, he didn't even realize that Richards had pulled up behind him until he was only feet away from him. That's when, quote, there was an exchange of words, end quote, before Randy turned around, worried about getting his tire on and getting the hell out of there. Shonda handed the weapon to Tim and yelled, quote, do it, get it over with, end quote. Tim snatched the firearm from her hand and aimed it at Randy's head, squeezing the trigger. Immediately, the man fell forward. A pool of blood crept out from underneath him, reaching out for Tim. His eyes were fixated on the scene in front of him, replaying it over and over, until his trance was broken by Shonda's howling laughter. He backed out and drove home. Shonda grinned between bursts of cackling the entire time. The couple disposed of the gun over the Littleton Bridge near Good Springs, stopping by the apartment to grab the gun case before dumping that into the Baker's Creek, not far from the bridge. Upon their final return home, they dismissed their babysitter, who had already put their children to sleep. Shonda became insatiable. She was all over Tim, begging him to make love to her. But he couldn't even fathom such a thought. Disappointed, she fell asleep, while Tim sat awake all night long, replaying the grim scenario in his head. The deafening sound of the rifle firing into the empty parking lot, the back of Randy's head as the bullet made contact, and the unnatural way his body collapsed to the pavement. Shonda's laughter echoing around him. The following morning, David O'Mary, the vice president of First National Bank of Jasper, was driving to work when he noticed an abandoned vehicle in the church's parking lot. He thought he saw what looked like a man lying on the ground nearby, so O'Mary turned around and pulled in, confirming his fear. Immediately, David alerted police. Their first suspect was Shonda from the moment they arrived on scene, so they decided to bring in her and her husband for questioning. Initially, Shonda denied knowing anything about Randy's death, but her story started to change and holes began to form. Picking apart the details, police were able to elicit a confession of sorts. Shonda was pinning the crime on Tim entirely, admitting only to being present. In the other room, Tim was sticking to his story until police played the tape recording showing Shonda throwing her husband under the bus. Broken by guilt and betrayal, Richards finally admitted to his role in the murder. He was offered a deal, life in prison with the possibility of parole one day, if he testified against Shonda. And Tim took it. Exactly 2 years after Randy McCullers' murder, jurors found Shonda Johnson guilty, and in an 11-1 vote, they agreed she deserved the death penalty. In February of 2000, Tim Richards pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. An automatic appeal was filed on Shonda's behalf, but it wasn't until October 6, 2006, that the Court of Criminal Appeals reviewed and reversed her conviction, remanding the case for a new trial on the grounds that no limiting instructions had been given to the jury regarding the use of certain evidence that had been presented. In January 2008, Tim Richards recanted his confession. He claimed that he had been coerced into taking the deal by his lawyer, despite not being guilty of the crime. Nothing substantial came from his recantation, though, as most took it for the cry of a man haunted by guilt. The guilt that he had murdered a man with a rifle, and the guilt that he had murdered a woman by proxy with his words. He was going to leave that prison one day and be free, while Randy and Shonda did not have that luxury any longer because of him. In May 2013, Richards became eligible for parole, but he ruined this when, a year before his potential release date, he escaped. Tim slipped out of the minimum security facility where he was housed and made his way to Alliance, Ohio, where he was caught by U.S. Marshals only days later. Tim was placed into a higher security prison, and he prolonged his incarceration by years. On July 10, 2014, Shonda Nicole Johnson was formally removed from death row and resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And that's where our story stands today. Transitioning into my random rant time, this was another incredibly challenging case to find information on, and I'm not sure whether it's because of the area or if it's the time period. There was only really like a handful of news articles that I found and some blogs written by like random people online, and my usual resources kind of failed me again. I was able to find that Shonda's mother's name is Wanda Johnson, and she also has a sister named Christy. There was a lot of mention about Shonda's looks and how it was really surprising that she was able to seduce all of these men because she was not very attractive. Her greasy hair was bleached blonde, and her green eyes were probably the most alluring feature on her plain face. She wasn't very well educated, and she barely was ever employed. In fact, she met Bill, husband number 4, while the two were working at a sleeping bag factory, but Shonda only had the job for about 2 weeks. Family members described Shonda as naive and childlike, but McIntyre's family labeled her as a pathological liar. She told them tall tales about being a high school beauty queen, this homecoming queen, and a successful paramedic, yet she was constantly broke. She would even sell Bill's CDs to get money to go to the bar. Shonda didn't have custody of any of her children for long. 3 of her 4 boys went on to live with the family of their fathers, but the son that she had with Tim Richards wound up living with Wanda. Shonda resided on death row at the Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women in Wetumpka for almost 2 decades before being introduced into general population as a lifer. Meanwhile, husband number 1, Jeff Nelson, remains a lifelong resident in Jasper, Alabama. I couldn't find information about Jimmy Tidwell, really. James Tidwell, surprisingly, is a very common name in Alabama. Even in Walker County, specifically, there were dozens. Randy Allen McCullough was born on July 12, 1966, in Haleyville to Rudy Allen and Betty McCullough. He had an older sister named Melissa Faye Bradshaw, who passed away in 2016. Randy had received a settlement for a car accident he was in with a logging truck, and this was part of the motive that Shonda and Tim had. William Hayward McIntyre, Bill, was born on February 3rd, 1970 to Frida McIntyre. He was studying to become a preacher, which is why his mother says that he supposedly convinced Shonda not to have an abortion. He said that when he first met her, he reportedly told her that he would help her raise the baby. But when Shonda began soliciting him to blow up Randy's car with dynamite, he quickly realized that the woman he was desperate to care for and pamper was actually somebody really sinister and evil. And unfortunately, McIntyre passed away on January 3rd, 2000 due to complications from his condition. Tim Richards was born in 1969 sometime. He was a delivery driver when he met Shonda, and he was described by police and his adoptive parents as being simple and trusting. He had been married once before, but the marriage failed, and he was really lonely, which is why he ended up marrying Shonda and kind of falling head over heels in love with her so quickly. He remains incarcerated to this day at Hamilton Aged and Infirmed Center in Marion County, Alabama, and he becomes eligible for release sometime in 2027. Shonda was described in one news article as a small-town siren, and I think this is the most accurate description. She dated a man named David Prescott, who she attempted to get to kill Randy too, but like the rest, he refused. It's not sure what Shonda told Tim about David, because at one point he had written David a threatening letter, which was actually brought up in trial. It seems to be a unanimous opinion that Tim was pretty much tricked into shooting Randy for Shonda, and it wasn't something that he would have done had she not whispered the wicked words into his ear, like the character from Constantine, Balthazar. I had to make that reference because it was immediately who I thought of when I was reading about this case. At least one person believes that Shonda is innocent. A friend named Bobby Feltman claimed that all of Johnson's husbands, except for McIntyre, beat her. But there was no proof of domestic violence against Shonda from any of her husbands. I found some interesting facts about Jasper, Alabama that I wanted to share. The residents worked on their own independent zombie movie called 3 Days Dead, and that's 3 with 2 3s instead of E's. And this was years in the making. It's not highly rated, earning only a 3.8 out of 10 stars on IMDb and a 96% on Rotten Tomatoes. But honestly, that makes it more appealing to me because I love, quote, terrible, end quote, horror movies. It's just something about it. And the fact that it was a community effort, I think makes it even kind of more like impressive and makes me want to watch it even more. I wasn't able to find the actual movie, but I did find the trailer, and I'll link that below in the description box if you're interested in checking that out yourself. Also, I found out that the character Sawyer from Lost is supposed to be from Jasper. I've never actually seen that show, so I didn't know. But if you're a Lost fan and you know something about Sawyer, apparently he is supposed to be from this place. I really wish that there was more I could discuss about the people involved in this, but there was such little known. Like, it's still a really intriguing one that I wanted to share, but I wish that I was able to present a little more, especially for my first episode of my Women Who Kill series. Obviously, we had to start with Alabama. Next week, though, I'm going to do just like a normal episode. I'm not going to make it part of this series. The one that I am working on came to mind the other day when I was like reminiscing about being able to actually read print books. Even though I can't read print books any longer, I still like to have used copies of them just to have my favorites in my collection. There's something about like running your fingers over pages that just can't compare to scrolling through a digital copy. Anyway, let me get back to where I was going. One of the books I was remembered reading was a true crime story that I found in my junior high school's library, and it was called Smoked: The Kids Next Door by Leon Bing. And I remember it being a really good book. I was fascinated by it. It definitely sparked my interest in the whole true crime genre. Surprisingly, I am able to find a lot about this, so I should have a really fascinating and kind of lengthy episode next week. So if you're interested, definitely tune in. If you like this episode, maybe I can release more or like release more frequently. I was planning on covering Alaska in 2 weeks, making this probably a bi-monthly thing, but I'm definitely open to your opinion. I've debated making this kind of like one huge episode, but I thought that would end up being like a 9-hour long thing, and I highly doubt that it's something that you guys are into. But if it is, feel free to let me know. I honestly am not sure whether you would prefer compilations versus like single topic episodes, shorter or longer episodes, so your feedback is certainly welcome. I wanted to wrap this up with a Bible verse that I found while I was researching, and I thought it was really ironic and fitting for Shonda. It's from Timothy 2:12, and it says, quote, "I do not permit a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man. Rather, she is to remain quiet," end quote. This isn't something that I personally subscribe to, but it made me think that if she had some sense of humility, she wouldn't be spending her life in prison. And more importantly, Randy McCullough would still be alive today. As I always do, I want to encourage my listeners to do something inspired by today's episode. I would love to suggest that you think of a time where you might have wronged someone and maybe write them a letter apologizing. Admitting that you are wrong and making amends is a very important life skill that many people aren't taught as children, but it's one that can be easily instilled into your adult life with practice, especially when you realize that admitting your part in a problem and working on a solution is really anything, like all anyone can ask for when they feel like they've been wronged. Reversely, maybe you want to think of someone who wronged you and forgive them. Growing up with a parent who had anger issues, I wholeheartedly believe that anger is like drinking poison while waiting for the other person to die. It does nothing but consume you. Learning to let go of anger and learning to forgive are equally as important skills that everyone should strive to strengthen. And I really tried not to make like every one of these suggestions something that like requires money. I want to make sure that everyone can participate. If you enjoy my podcast, feel free to like and subscribe, comment, share, all of that good stuff. Any criticism or case suggestions can be left down below, or if you prefer to email them to me, my email address is wickedwordsyt@gmail.com. Thank you to everybody, every single one of you. I really mean that from the bottom of my heart. My interpretation of these stories, like, it really means a lot to me to be able to tell them to you. I research and write each one of these by myself. These aren't like news articles. I am just telling you this is something that I put my whole like heart into, and I really try to, do these stories justice. So I hope that you guys really enjoy them, and I hope you all have a wonderful week. I will see you next Wednesday, and until next time, I'll catch you on the flip side.